Well, yesterday, as many predicted, Mark McGowan and Labor were re-elected to govern Western Australia. Their triumph comes off the back of some extraordinary events over the last 12 months and some even more extraordinary set of polling numbers. In September last year, Mark McGowan's personal approval rating cracked 91%, and evenly as recently as Friday, it settled at 88%. And finally, folks, the polls got it right. Labor is predicted to win an astonishing 51 or 52 out of 59 lower house seats. Swings of 20% were seen across held and non-held seats. Mark McGowan achieved 91% two-party preferred in his own seat, and that is just crazy stuff. Controversial at times, McGowan and Labor have been rewarded for the hard work they have done and the decisions they've made. Their response to COVID has won them votes across the length and breadth of Western Australia. And if you look around the major states, you'll see similar stories. Hugely popular leaders with strong two-party preferred polling numbers to boot. In the last round of state-based polls, we have Queensland Annastacia Palaszczuk. She's got a 65% approval rating, despite some of the harshest criticisms out there. She's also increased her majority at last year's state election. Victoria's Daniel Andrews, even with his hotel quarantine troubles, sits on 65% too. Gladys Berejiklian and her government are surrounded by scandal after scandal, yet she has an eye-watering 75% approval rating. Yet Scott Morrison, at the same poll, sat at 53%. Last month's news poll has the Federal Coalition and Labor deadlocked at 50-50. And those two set of results came prior to the scandals of the past month in Canberra. So why isn't Scotty riding the wave of post-COVID popularity alongside his national cabinet colleagues? Why were the premiers able to ride through multiple controversies, yet the Prime Minister cannot? Throughout history, we've seen established democracies back leaders in a time of crisis. Yet during the bushfires, the Prime Minister was shouted out of regional towns, and during the pandemic, well, he just doesn't have the numbers to back him up. Some would argue that Scott Morrison has played a key role in guiding the nation through the pandemic. But do these numbers just show that people don't buy the Daggy Dad sideshow anymore? Now that we see that the polling got it right in Western Australia, is this the beginning of the end of the Morrison government? Tanvir, are these polling numbers just the public saying the states are doing all the hard work on COVID and the federal government need to do more?
Look, I'm not so sure, Jerome. Look, I enjoyed those insights, and you're right. We've had this whole kind of challenge to our federalism, haven't we, throughout COVID, where people have been opening and shutting borders left, right and centre, and the federal government have looked a little bit impotent at times. I mean, look, some of the key decisions like blocking borders, and they've essentially subsidised the states in terms of JobKeeper, etc. But I think, you know, we had our mayor references early on. You know, all of us have been on local government at some stage. To some extent, we've all reverted to localism. You know, we've got to now our house, our backyards, the local coffee shop. So we've all kind of retreated. And I think our focus on our premiers sort of reflects that. And obviously health is primarily a state duty as well. So I think we've all retreated into slightly smaller worlds, and that reflects our absolute kind of almost unquestioning obedience to our premiers. And like you look at Queensland, you know, some of the state closures there were completely unjustifiable, and yet she's been rewarded thoroughly politically, not only winning the election, but also getting a whole cash splash from the federal government in terms of a lot of these travel destinations. And to some extent, McGowan enjoys the same thing. Like, I think for a good period, some of his border closures really had no logic behind them, but they were politically, and they clearly were, nobody can question, they were politically very successful. Nobody can question that. But back to, I mean, and you'll know this, Jerome, that a poll even came out today in New South Wales showing that Premier Berejiklian enjoyed an enormous lead, and there's some moves now to potentially move on the opposition leader, Jody Mackay. So we'll certainly see a bit more action on that front. But look, I think we've got a few things coming up. JobKeeper is about to end. So that's going to change the dynamic with the states being able to kind of sit on their laurels regarding federal support. I also think two-party, the PM to PM, I think is still very thoroughly in the Prime Minister's favour. And you know, there are some pressures on Anthony Albanese. You're right, the two-party preferred hasn't shifted, but I actually think the feds will still enjoy a lot of that incumbency, and especially as the economy kind of rushes back, coming up, as the vaccine gets out, JobKeeper stops. Sorry, Campbell.
But Tanvir, that's actually Jerome's point, if I can just butt in, because what Jerome's pointing out, which I don't like it, but I have to agree with him because the numbers say what they say. The PM's got a great personal rating compared to Albanese, but it isn't translating. It is never translated into a better two-party preferred. The primary vote last time for the coalition was only 42 and Labor around 37. Those are almost the numbers, in Queensland when I lost in 2015. It's that close. So the point here is, why isn't it translating? What's going wrong? Well, I actually have the view that the PM has lost a lot of people in the Conservative ranks. Probably they'll come back to the mothership and vote at the end of the day on election day. But there's a lot of people in the Conservative side of politics who are quite distressed with him because they believe he hasn't shown actual leadership, that he doesn't stand up for values. The IPA have been going after him with red-hot poker. People like Janet Albrechtsen, the columnist, Nikki Sav has been after him. So you see this all the time in the commentariat, and I think it's a real issue. I think Jerome's making a really important point. The coalition, are on a knife edge at the moment for the next election.
Campbell, I just want to take up your point on leadership. We see the premiers, particularly, when the pandemic was at its height, front the media every day. They were seen to be working because they were working. Yet Scott Morrison still pushed out these photos of him building a hut or doing some daggy dad stuff. Are people just seeing straight through that? They want a prime minister that works and works hard, and that's Scott Morrison.
Jerome, he did put together the national cabinet, which was quite innovative, and really they have overseen.
Which has been impotent.
That's right.
Which has been a free-for-all.
I think our Prime Minister's been doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and I think the premiers have got away with looking as though they've been doing heavy lifting when they in fact haven't been doing much heavy lifting. And I think, and particularly, it's almost become like it was going to be obvious. It was obvious. Everyone knew that, the McGowan government were going to be voted back in. We'd seen it repeatedly with the territory election, of course, the Queensland election as well. What concerns me, I think, is that, that some premiers have got away with the fact that they now believe that they can continue on with some, authoritarian kind of behaviour. In the Northern Territory, we've got a disastrous situation going on where our economy is taking a dive. We've got crime and youth crime going through the roof, and Territorians are now, a lot of them, largely regretting that they'd voted back in the current government. And so, I think in Western Australia, you've got a situation where Western Australians see themselves as pretty much, they're their own sort of people. Perth is one of the most remotest cities in the world, and they're doing great in terms of their iron ore. So, of course, they want to maintain the situation they've got. And when people are faced with the fear of COVID, and that's largely what's going on here, is people have been driven by fear to vote the way that they have done so. And I think there's something comfortable about Scott Morison, and maybe there's not enough fear there. That's perhaps that's why we've got the polls that we have. But maybe there's a difference between the polls federally and state by state as well.